It's not really about occupation. It's not really about skill set. It's not about personality. It's not about giftedness. It's about the target that Jesus has laid before us. It's about God's call taking the ruling interest in your life. If you would, please take your Bibles and open up with me to Luke chapter 5 this morning. If you're just joining with us, we normally try to walk through books of the Bible, and we are working our way through the Gospel of Luke right now. So Luke chapter 5 is where we find ourselves today. Throughout history, people have distinguished themselves or set themselves apart from other people through some sort of mark upon their life. The standard thing we would think of probably today is the uniform. The uniform of the preacher is a suit and a tie. I'm a little negligent today. Forgive me. The uniform, we watch it on sports teams. We watch it at work. We see it in all types of ways. And we know by how somebody is represented in a uniform, we know what team they belong to, who they are aligning themselves with. It's also been haircuts, tattoos, you name it, and people have used it to distinguish who they are and who they are not a lot of times. And the Bible is no different. People have been distinguished in the Bible through different marks in different ways. It's all over the place. The Old Testament is full of a system, of set of laws that were meant to set people apart, to distinguish people one from another. Most notably in the Old Testament in the covenant of circumcision, that was to set the people apart as the people belonging to the Lord. The New Testament mark, we would probably say, would orient around baptism. Those who have followed Jesus in baptism and are walking with Him. But then there is Jesus. And what Jesus defines as the mark that set people apart who follow Him. And the marks of someone who belongs to Jesus become far less about the outward appearance and much more about the heart and the condition of the soul, the condition of the mind. In this text, we are going to see the call of some of the first disciples. And in that call of them and that interaction with them, we will see several marks that set apart a follower of Jesus. And we're going to be confronted with the question, do these mark me? Do I bear these marks of a follower of Jesus? Look at Luke chapter 5. We'll start reading in verse 1. The scripture says, on one occasion, while the crowd was pressing in on him to hear the word of God, he was standing by the lake of Gennesaret. That's the same as the Sea of Galilee or the Sea of Tiberias, as you're seeing it across the scriptures. It's the same place. And he saw two boats by the lake, but the fishermen had gone out of them and they were on the shore washing their nets. Getting into one of the boats, which was Simon's, he asked him to put out a little bit from the land. And he sat down and taught the people from the boat. When he'd finished speaking, though, he said to Simon, put out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch. Simon looked back at Jesus and said, Master, we've toiled all night and we took nothing. But at your word, I will let down the nets. When they had done this, they enclosed a large number of fish to the point that their nets were breaking. So they signaled quickly to their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and they filled both the boats so that they even began to sink. And when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord. For he and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of fish that they had taken. So also were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. And Jesus said to Simon, do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching men. And when they had brought their boats to land, they left everything and followed him. As you read through this text, we see these first followers of Jesus having these early interactions with Jesus in a pretty natural setting, a pretty natural scene, one they were very familiar with. But as it unfolds, as the story unfolds, we begin to find people being changed by the presence of Jesus, begin to resemble or present these marks of a follower of Christ. The first one I want you to see this morning in this text is that marks of a follower of Jesus is that they are sensitive to his word. They're sensitive to his word. Now, the word is mentioned twice in this story. The first time is in verse 1. You can see it on one occasion while the crowd was pressing in on him to, watch this, hear the word of God. Now, Jesus at this point, just think about what all we've seen and even haven't seen at this point. He's healed a man with an unclean demon in probably an area pretty close to where they were right now. He had even healed everybody who was sick in town probably a few days or just a short time before this. That's all in chapter 4. If you go back further than that, you see that Jesus had begun his ministry. He'd been baptized. The Spirit had descended. It said he had healed people. Reports were going out about Jesus into all the surrounding area. And so when Jesus gathers or comes to a place at this point in time, people are flocking to Jesus. Either they want to be healed or they want to hear what he has to say. It's the same thing today. When somebody popular comes into town, people flock to hear what they have to say. They want to know, they want to hear, just be in his presence and hear what his word is from the Lord. But there is a big difference between being gathered in a crowd to being around Jesus to being obedient and sensitive to the word of Jesus himself. There's a lot of times people will gather a crowd and present Jesus as the subject of what is going on. But there is a large difference between gathering a large crowd around the subject of Jesus and actually people being obedient to the word of Jesus. We see it quite often in Jesus' ministry. A large crowd will gather, then intentionally he will say something crazy and off the wall, and everybody looks at each other and says, "What are we going to do with this guy? This is too hard of a teaching." And they leave and they fall away. There's a big difference between gathering around the person of Jesus and being obedient to the word of Jesus. And we see that difference in verse 5. Look at verse 5. Simon answered him, "We toiled all night and we took nothing, but at your word I will let down the nets." So we have people in verse 1 gathering to the word. We have people in verse 5 responding in obedience to the word. Now what happens in between shows us how this came about. So the disciples, the soon-to-be disciples, these fishermen, they're sitting on the shoreline mending their nets, and Jesus is being pressed against the Sea of Galilee. And when this is happening, he sees the boats sitting there. The boats are probably 20 to 30 feet long. They've actually found one of these boats that would have been from the time of Jesus. They've dated it, and they've preserved it. It was kind of a wild process. I got to see it when we were in Israel. I should have put a picture up, but I didn't quite get to that this week. So you can look it up. The Jesus boat. It's on display. You can find it. So they're probably 20 to 30 feet long, about this wide. They're not huge. They'd be a little rocky, Scott. Like, you're not getting much stability on one of these things. When the waves start chopping, you can see why they would fear for their life when it got a little rambunctious on the Sea of Galilee. And so they would be, what Jesus does, because the crowd was gathering all around him, is he hops in one of the boats. Now, he sees the guy sitting over here to the side, and he recognizes, hey, that's Simon. Well, Simon and Jesus have already met. Jesus already healed Simon's mother-in-law from a fever. And so he probably knew Simon and said, well, I'll get in Simon's boat. Now, he didn't just get in the boat. He would have had to get in the boat, and Simon had to get in with him and pushed out a little bit from the shore. Now, the fishermen, in this day and age, for this type of fishing that they were doing, they fished at night. Late in the evening, they would fish into the night, and then the next morning, they would be doing this work. They would be cleaning and mending their nets. So they would take these nets and throw them overboard, and then they would gather them up, and that's how they fished in this day. And this was the deep water nets. They had shallow water nets as well, but this was the deep water nets that took a lot more effort and a lot more work. Which is why they say in verse 5, Master, we have worked all night. That word toiled, it's literally, we are tired to the bone. Like we are exhausted. We have been at this all night and we caught nothing. Okay? And so they're in the boats. Jesus finishes his teaching. And, so Luke doesn't really tell us what he taught. He doesn't say anything about what Jesus taught. He just says when Jesus finished, the focus of the story in this case is not on Jesus' teaching. It's on what he's about to do. So Simon Peter's been sitting there probably listening to Jesus teach. And nothing's really happening. And then he tells him, hey, let's paddle out a little ways. Let's go fishing. Now, you remember how Jesus grew up in Nazareth. Nazareth was not on the Sea of Galilee. Nazareth was up in the mountains. They would go to Galilee to get their fish to eat, this was not Jesus' territory. Jesus was a carpenter by trade if he was anything. He was not a fisherman. Now, if you are a professional at something, and this is your livelihood, and some amateur walks into the room and says, hey, let's do this. This seems like a good idea. After you've been at it all night long, and remember, you've been doing this entire life. Your dad did this as well. And some amateur walks into the room and says, hey, let's go fishing again. And you're not getting paid by him. This is not some guided tour kind of thing. He says, hey, let's go fishing again. Their normal work would have been go to the market, sell the fish, go home, get some sleep, get prepped for the next day. Instead, here they are back on the water. This would involve rowing back out into the deep water, because remember, they're not in the shallow net business, they're in the deep net business. So they have to literally row the boat, and they have an extra passenger, which makes it a little bit heavier. So they row the boat back out into the deep water, and then Jesus tells them, hey, why don't we drop the nets right here? And this is the difference. This right here is the difference. Look at how Peter says it. Master, we've worked all night. We caught nothing. This language, but at your word, I will. At your word, I will. Has there ever been a point in your life where Jesus has told you to do something and you said, at your word? No, I don't think so. Sadly, that's where a lot of us live every day. We know Jesus. We know his word. We know what he calls us to do. We know what he asks us to do. And yet at his word, we say, maybe a little bit later. Jesus, I'm tired. We've been working all night. Jesus, we know what we're doing. This is not where you catch the fish, and this is not the time in which you catch the fish. So why now? That's not how they responded, though. The model for us and for our response to Jesus is simply, at your word, I will. Marks of a follower of Christ are people who are sensitive to his word. Where is God speaking to you now? Are you ready to say, at your word, I will? And you don't add anything else to it. You don't put any other caveats on it. You don't ask for more explanation. You don't ask for more clarity. You don't try to negotiate the situation. You don't try to get better terms. You just say, at your word, I will. I will do what you've called me to do. Marks of a follower of Christ are people who are sensitive to his word. Another mark of followers of Christ are people who are humbled by his presence and power. Now, Zach stole my thunder on this one a little bit, but we're going to point to the same picture. Okay? Watch what happens in this. So, at the word of Jesus, they let down the nets. And when they had done this, verse 6, they catch an amount of fish that is incomprehensible to them. Their nets are beginning to break. Like they are in the process of the nets breaking. So they signal to their partners, hey, get out here. So they're holding on to the nets while the partners are paddling out or paddling over to them perhaps. And they get the nets up finally, and the catch is so great that it not only fills the boat that they're in, but it fills the other boat as well, to the point where both boats are sinking. And in the chaos of this, while all this is happening, Peter, being Peter and acting like Peter normally does, leaves the work. You realize this. He leaves the work and turns to what's going on and says, but watch what happens. He fell down at Jesus' knees. I imagine his brother and his partners are like, hey, dude, get back on the oar. We're trying to get to shore before this thing sinks. But when you encounter the power and the presence of the holy, you don't think about other things in that moment. And that's what is happening here. Peter saw it. When he saw what was happening, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord. And that Lord is not the divine, holy Lord that we see across the Old Testament. That's not what he's saying there. It's a term of, I bow before someone who I am inferior to. Like this one is superior, I am inferior. So I don't think Simon Peter at this point was saying, you are the Lord, you are the Son of God. That we're not there yet. Simon's definitely not there yet. They're going to be struggling just a few weeks later after this. They're going to be struggling to figure out who is this guy that even the winds and the waves obey him. But what he has figured out is whoever this guy is and wherever he comes from, he is holy and I am not. You notice that. Look at his reaction. His reaction is not just, wow, this guy's incredible. His reaction is based on his spiritual reality. He says, depart from me, for I am a sinful man. That is why Zach took it to Isaiah 6. And I want to redirect you back to Isaiah 6. When the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and lifted up. The train of his robe filled the temple. There's smoke everywhere. There's creatures crying out, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. And what is his response? Woe is me. I don't belong here. I don't belong in the presence of the holy. I am unclean. I'm from a people who are unclean. There's no qualifications in my life that allows me to be in the presence of the holy. And that's exactly what Peter was experiencing right here. I do not belong in the presence of the holy. Whoever you are, whatever you are doing, whatever you have done, you and me do not go together. Depart from me. Why? Because there was a concept in their head, a theology, if you will, that the holy cannot dwell with the unholy. And in that is the beauty of the gospel. When Peter says, get away from me, we should have nothing to do with each other. Jesus doesn't go anywhere. Jesus stays right there. He asked Jesus to leave, for in his mind, the holy, that which is from God, cannot inhabit with the sinful. And Jesus turns that on its head through grace. Everyone else thought the same thing as well. You can see it in verse 9. All who were with him were astonished. Their minds could not wrap their heads around what was going on. The catch of fish was that big. It wasn't just a bumper day and they got a hit every time they cast. No, this was something abnormal. This was something out of the bounds of normal. And they associated it with the holy. God has entered into our presence in some way, shape, or form. Some power from the Father has come into our presence. And they couldn't believe it. But instead of leaving their presence, Jesus embraced it and calls them to put their fears aside. Do you see that in verse 10? He tells them, do not be afraid. He's not saying you shouldn't have fear. He's telling you, put it aside, because that's not the interaction we're having. I have not come to judge you. I've come to redeem you. I've come to bring grace into your presence. You are right. You're right in your response. You are not supposed to be in my presence. You are not allowed into my presence, which is why Jesus came into theirs. That's the beauty of the gospel. That's the beauty. That is our Christian hope. It's not that we have any right to be in the presence of God. It's that Jesus has invaded ours. Jesus got into his boat. Jesus inserted himself into Peter's life. And he does the same thing with you and I today. Their fears were rooted in what God was doing in their midst, and God relieves them of their fears and says, I am coming to you. They thought they were in trouble because the holy had invaded the unholy, and yet the holy showed grace. Now, let me just say, there's another layer to this. For us today on this side of the cross and believing in Jesus, this was an initial occurrence. When you first meet Jesus, you become acutely aware, when you really truly meet him, you become acutely aware that you don't belong. And it's only by grace that you are here. But somewhere along the way, I'm afraid we lose that sometimes. Listen, there is no place for arrogance in the life of a Christian. None. In fact, I would submit to you today that if there is arrogance simmering in your soul, it probably tells me that you haven't been with Christ very much. Because to be with Christ, to be in the presence and the power of Christ, is to be humbled. The marks of the followers of Christ across everywhere Jesus goes, those who are pictured as his followers are humble in his presence because he is holy and they are not. Those who are not humble in his presence, the arrogant, are always condemned wherever Jesus goes. Those to him coming thinking they have everything figured out, he always turns the tables and condemns them. And yet the humble he receives with grace. Why? Because we're sinners. And when we come as sinners, that's when we find grace. When you come as having it all together, God resists the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. The marks of a follower of Christ is we're humbled by his presence and his power. A third mark for you this morning. We are, his followers of Jesus are pointed at his target. They're pointed at his target. So he shows grace to them. He says, do not be afraid. And then those lines at the end of verse 10 form the substance of this idea that we are pointed at his target. Jesus says to Simon, don't be afraid. From now on, you will be catching men. This is still in the context of Peter on his knees before the Lord. The unholy bowing to the holy. Depart from me. No, I'm going to show grace to you. Don't fear. From now on, from this point moving forward, we still haven't got back to shore yet, but from this point forward, your life is going to be transformed, and you have a new target in your life, and that target is catching men. Now, obviously, Jesus is doing a play on what he's just doing with these men. The amateur fisherman has stepped to the professionals and said, hey, here's how you need to be doing this. Let me show you what's going on. Why? So that he could make this point. You're not going to do this anymore. Now you're going to be catching other men. And the idea of catching men there, it's you're going to save them alive. That's kind of the way if you translated it very literally, it would be you are going to catch them alive. You're going to save them to new life, is the picture. Not only is he calling them to work in this way, but he's going to empower them to do so. They had spent a lifetime casting nets to catch fish. Now they are going to have their role reversed, and they're going to become the amateur fishermen. The amateur told them what to do, and now they're going to become the amateur to the professional because their role has changed, and they're no longer catching fish. Now they're catching men. They're beginning to learn the process of casting a different net to catch a different catch. They're going after something new. And it's about men. Listen, the life of following Christ is pretty simple. It really is. I'm not saying it's simple to do, but pointing out the target of Jesus is not complicated. Jesus' target has always been men. It's always been people. From the very beginning, his target was people. It was to redeem people. It's about using the net of the gospel, that's the image here, using the net of the gospel to draw people into relationship with Christ. It's not really about occupation. It's not really about skill set. It's not about personality. It's not about giftedness. It's about the target that Jesus has laid before us. It's about God's call taking the ruling interest in your life. About being the governing principle that no matter what occupation you find yourself in, the call of Jesus remains the same. Fish for people. Cast the gospel net and pull it in to see what you will catch. The fishermen that day had no clue what was about to happen when they cast their nets. They probably didn't even throw them with joy or willingness. Remember, they were bone tired. It was probably just more of a shove it over the side. We know nothing's coming out of this. Get it out. Do what he says. Just push it out. Just kind of tip it over the edge. And yet they pulled it back full of things that they could have never imagined. And so it is when we sow the seeds of the gospel, to mix metaphors. When we cast the net of the gospel and draw it back in, we never know what God is going to do. Why? Because we can't see what's under the water. We can't see what God is doing. We can't see how he's working. So we just do our part. Just push the net out there and pull it back in. And do it again, and do it again, and do it again. Until he comes and says, it's time to go home. And it's low-hanging fruit, I know, and it may not be deep enough for you today, but the question still needs to be asked, where are you pointed at in ministry and life? What are you working to achieve? Does it align with what the Lord has called us all to? Are you using the everyday pathways of your life for the sake of the calling of the kingdom to just cast the net and draw it back in? The people of God, they're marked by being pointed at his target. The last one for you this morning ties closely with what we just read. The marks of the people of God is they're sacrificing for his cause. They sacrificed for his cause. Look at verse 11. When they had brought the boats to land, they left everything and followed him. And those who are worried about the fish and what happened to the fish, okay, they probably left them with James and John's dad. Okay, so the fish didn't get wasted, so don't worry about it. Okay? But they left everything. Now, a natural fisherman would have said, I got a new hot spot. I got a new place to go. We're going back there. I don't know what's down there, but I'm going back there. Not them. When they get back to land, everything changes. Why? Because they've been called by the Lord. From now on, your life is going to change. And they sacrificed to do so. For these, God had a special call to abandon everything and to follow him. And I must say, I think sometimes we set up this false sense of worthiness of fellowship with Jesus. If you don't abandon everything to go live in a tent in Africa, then you're not really a follower of Jesus. But the reality is, this was not God's call to all people, to literally abandon everything that they own and follow Him. Yes, in our hearts and in our souls, we abandon the attachment to everything to go and follow Him. Yes. But it's not the call of everyone to go to another world or to go wander around and follow Jesus. And we know that from the Gospel of Luke, Luke chapter 8. The man from whom, when he crosses the Sea of Galilee at a later date, he comes to the land of Gerasene, and there's this crazy guy full of demons. He heals him, and the guy desperately wants to follow Jesus. He desperately wants to be attached to Jesus. This seems like a prime candidate, right? And what does Jesus tell him? No. You can't come with me. You stay home. Go home, in fact, he says. Return to your home and declare how much as God has done for you. It says he went away, proclaiming throughout the whole city how much Jesus had done for him. He didn't go anywhere. He stayed home. Later, as Luke writes the Gospel of the Acts, okay, the ties go closely with his gospel. Guess what happens? You have people who go, and you have people who stay. Some stay home, some leave it all sacrifice for his sake. Some stay home, some support those who go, all sacrifice. I had a friend from seminary who went to India a lot when we were in seminary. He'd been affiliated with a group, and every time he would get ready to go, he would send a text or call people and say, hey, are you willing to hold the rope? See, he had a pattern. He would do this all the time. Are you willing to hold the rope? And the idea in his mind, as he had read it somewhere, is that as he and the team with him were stepping out into the unknown, stepping off the ledge, he wanted to know if there were people who were going to be holding the rope as he stepped out into the unknown. So as God calls people from our midst to go, literally, physically leave everything behind and go and follow Him, we who stay behind, we don't just do nothing. They sacrificed home, house, comforts, work, whatever it may be, time with family, and go. We sacrifice to hold the rope for them so that they may go. That is one thing that I love about being in, that is probably the primary thing that I love about being in our convention of churches. I say Southern Baptist, and most people are like, or a lot of people, maybe not in Oklahoma, but around the country, you say Southern Baptist, and it's like, we see what you guys do on Twitter. That's really, that's really annoying. You guys just yell at each other all the time and fight about all kinds of stuff that really doesn't make any sense. And they're probably right. But when you get into the local church level, you know what's going on? People are holding the rope for thousands of missionaries across North America. People are holding the rope for almost 4,000 missionaries around the world, plus their families who have forsaken everything to go to the kingdom. People are holding the rope for local people doing ministry around town and in their local context. That's why I love being who we are, is because we are holding the rope and we are sacrificing for people that we will never meet until the kingdom. We're holding the rope for 6 seminaries who are training missionaries and pastors and counselors to go out and to serve, some across the nation, some back to their hometowns, to tell people about Jesus, aimed all at the same target, all sacrificing for His cause, staying home, leaving it all. We all sacrifice for His cause. We all give of ourselves so that the gospel may go forth, so the net may be cast and drawn back in, not knowing ever what God is going to do. But we keep doing it until He comes.